G'day folks. Today I wanted to look at the issue of the Australian Taxation Office and the claim that it is a non-legal entity. And after we've looked into that issue to determine whether it is or is not a non-legal entity, I'll then discuss a couple of other issues. So I've got here a High Court of Australia case. This is Dooney v Henry. From the 24th of August 2000. Now this is an excerpt. I've actually downloaded the full judgment. This is from the judgment for the case. You'll never get the transcript, but this is the judgment. And I shouldn't say never say never, but it's very unlikely you'll ever get a transcript of a court case. This is the judgment anyway. So I'll just read, and these are excerpts from the judgment. This is not the full judgment. You can download Dooney v Henry off the internet if you want to look at the whole thing. Suffice to say, I'll just give a bit of a setup for the case. The Commissioner of Taxation, or acting for the Australian Taxation Office, has taken the defendant to court, chasing some money. And what has happened, what we're looking at here, is that at some point the defendant has made a counterclaim against the Commissioner of Taxation. So this is the counterclaim. So you'll see that I've tried to put in here, the things you see and read in here are things that I've inserted in order to try and clarify what's going on here, because it's a bit confused. And I'll just start reading it and I'll just stop as I go through to explain a couple of things. So it says here, Callan J, which is the justice in the case, in these matters which I have heard together, and then at number 2, the defendant, the applicant, and then I've put the taxpayer. The reason that's confusing is, in the initial case, this guy, the taxpayer, is the defendant and the Commissioner of Taxation is the plaintiff. But because this is a counterclaim, he's initially the defendant, but now he's the applicant in the counterclaim, which is why he's both the defendant and the applicant. So I've just put in the taxpayer to clarify for you who we're talking about here. But this is the taxpayer, what we're looking at is a claim the taxpayer has made against the Commissioner of Taxation. So the defendant, the applicant, the taxpayer, has issued a summons seeking orders substantially as follows. 1. The statement of claim be struck out on the ground that the plaintiff, the Commissioner of Taxation, has no standing to bring the action. So what's happened is that he's saying, well, the Commissioner of Taxation's brought an action against me, but I don't believe he has any standing to do so because, and you will soon see, the reason he's arguing this is that he's saying that the Australian Taxation Office is a non-legal entity and therefore has no standing in court on the basis it's a non-legal entity. So let's move on. Number 6. So there then follows an allegation purportedly supported by a number of particulars which need not be repeated, that the Australian Taxation Office is a body without a legal existence. And this is the judge talking, this is the judge giving his judgment. This last allegation and the misconceived claim for relief in respect of it can be immediately disposed of. The Australian Taxation Office is not a legal personality. The applicant, Commissioner of Taxation, does not contend that it is. Okay. You want to know if the Australian Taxation Office is a non-legal entity? A High Court judge has just declared that to be the case. Now you might be confused at this point. I'll clear up your confusion in a minute, but I just want to get it clear what we're talking about here. A High Court judge, in this case, has confirmed that the Australian Taxation Office is not a legal personality, and that is the same as saying it is a non-legal entity. And the Commissioner of Taxation does not contend that it is. So the Commissioner of Taxation doesn't claim the Australian Taxation Office is a legal entity, and a High Court judge has confirmed the Australian Taxation Office is not a legal entity. So but you won't establish a fact any better than that. The Commissioner of Taxation who's defending this claim goes, yeah, it's not a legal entity. And the judge goes, yeah, it's not a legal entity. But as you may have gleaned, that fact's not really going to that fact is really not going to help out this taxpayer. So why is that? Well, we'll have a look at a couple of other things. First of all, I'll just tell you what the run-of-the-mill interpretation is of the fact that the Australian Taxation Office is clearly a non-legal entity. What you find on the internet is most people drawing the conclusion that that means that it is illegal. Now, it's true that a non-legal entity has no status and standing in law. What that taxpayer didn't take note of properly is that it's the Australian Taxation Office that has no status and standing in law. But he wasn't in court challenging the Australian Taxation Office. He was in court challenging the Commissioner of Taxation. And the Commissioner of Taxation does have status and standing in law because the Commissioner of Taxation is a legal entity. Okay? So his challenge was, you don't have any status and standing in a law court to bring any charge against me because you're a non-legal entity. But the non-legal entity wasn't who he was in court with. He was in court with the Commissioner of Taxation, not the Australian Taxation Office. That's an important distinction to make. Right, so is a non-legal entity an illegal entity? Well, here's definitions of both of non-legal and illegal from dictionary.com. Non-legal, not related to, qualified for, or phrased in manner of the practice of law. And then, as I've highlighted for you, in brackets, distinguished from illegal. So what they're saying is, well, non-legal and illegal aren't the same thing. They're telling you there, in the definition of non-legal, they're telling you it's not the same thing as illegal. And in the definition of illegal, forbidden by law or statute, contrary to or forbidden by official rules, regulations, etc. So there you have it. Non-legal and illegal aren't the same thing. So all those people who've been running around saying that the Australian Taxation Office is illegal are absolutely incorrect. But it is non-legal. So what does that mean? Well, I've got a fair bit of experience dealing with entities over my much of the work I've been involved with, pretty much all my grown life. So here's what I know about a non-legal entity. Every partnership is a non-legal entity, and every trust is a non-legal entity. Now, I'll explain to you, I'll give you the way I use to identify whether an entity is a legal entity or whether it's a non-legal entity. A legal entity has the right to sue and can be sued in its own name. A non-legal entity, because it doesn't have status and standing in law, cannot sue or be sued in its own name. I'll explain it now in terms of a partnership. When a partnership gets sued, the person suing the partnership doesn't sue the partnership name. He sues each individual partner individually or jointly as well. But when you're bringing a case, you have to name every partner in the partnership because you sue the partners, not the partnership. Same with a trust, or similar in trust. When you sue a trust, you don't sue the trust name. You sue the trustee of the trust in the trustee's name. If you're quick, you'll sort of have figured out what the Australian Taxation Office is, or at least what I believe it to be. So here's what I'll say about the Australian Taxation Office, which I'll say are facts we can logically deduce from knowing that the Australian Taxation Office is a non-legal entity and that it's represented by the Commissioner of Taxation. These are the conclusions you can draw if you know enough about how the system works. The Australian Taxation Office is an unincorporated association, meaning it's not registered. Okay? And that's all trusts would fall into, pretty much all trusts would fall into that category, as would partnerships. You can now get registered partnerships in different jurisdictions in the world, but generally partnerships aren't registered and trusts aren't registered. So I'm going to now take a little bit of a, I guess you'd call it a punt, or an intelligent hypothesis. I want to suggest to you that what the Australian Taxation Office is, because they tell you it's a non-legal entity, that's telling you what it's not. That's telling you it's not illegal. Non means not. So not a legal entity. It doesn't tell you what it is, because it's a particular type of non-legal entity. And as I said, there's many forms of non-legal entity. And they're not telling you which one it is. I'd like to suggest that the best fit, from what I can see here, is that the Australian Taxation Office is a trust. And the Commissioner of Taxation is its trustee. Which would account for why, when the Australian Taxation Office takes anyone to court, or when anyone takes the Australian Taxation Office to court, the court is always cited as Commissioner of Taxation v, or someone v Commissioner of Taxation, because you can't sue the Australian Taxation Office in its own name, because it's a non-legal entity. So you've got the suing and is always done in the name of the trustee, which is the Commissioner of Taxation. So that, from my experience of trusts and partnerships and companies and the whole gamut of entities, I would say that it's a very neat fit for the Australian Taxation Office to be a trust and the Commissioner of Taxation to be its trustee. Now, I can't prove that absolutely. I'd have to get them to state it, or I'd have to cite the trustee, which leads into the next issue, but that'll be in another video. So I just wanted to clarify for people that the Australian Taxation Office is a non-legal entity, but it's not illegal. And just stay away from those sites that try and conflate the term non-legal into illegal. They don't know what they're talking about. I've actually spoken to a few of them. They are not willing to be corrected on the error of fact. They want to be belligerent in their ignorance, for whatever reasons, I don't know. But I've spoken to a number of people who operate the sites where it's claimed that the Australian Taxation Office is illegal, and they just don't want to know. These are the facts. I've got the definitions there. I don't know. The definitions of non-legal and illegal are there. If that doesn't get your attention, go and if you think I'm an agent for some, I'm not. I'm going to tell you how you don't have to pay income tax in the end. But go and look up the definitions of the terms non-legal and illegal yourself, and stop following the advice of people who have no idea what they're talking about and do no research to support what they claim. Most of them just cut and paste from other sites without ever doing any research to check whether what they're putting in front of you is a bunch of hogwash or has any veracity to it. So I'm going to do another video, and this will be on the issue of the formation of the Australian Taxation Office, which is another issue that gets talked about. Often people confuse that issue with this issue. They confuse the formation of the Australian Taxation Office with the non-legal status of the Australian Taxation Office. I'm going to keep the two separate and clear, which is why I'll do it as a separate video. But knowing it's interesting to know that the Australian Taxation Office is definitely factually an unincorporated association, and most likely a trust. That's good to know. But where you can start putting nails into the coffin is when you start looking at the formation document of the Australian Taxation Office and the fact that it cannot be found on government records. And I'll present all the evidence to show that they can't locate it on government records, and then I'll tell you what I think that probably means, and that is a starting point to not having to have anything to do with the Australian Taxation Office if you don't wish to. Okay, I'll leave that with you folks, and get to preparing and presenting the next video. See you folks.